In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the book, The Unstoppable American, Bobby Fischer's Road to Reykjavik, and also that gives me an excuse to show you a classic Fischer game from those years. So this book, there we go, The Unstoppable American by Jan Timman, goes into detail in those years, 1970, 1971, charting Bobby Fischer's incredible series of successes that brought him to the World Championship match, the final against Spassky in 1972. And I think those really were Fischer's golden years. Those of you that follow this channel will know that I share a fascination with that period of Fischer's career. So this book is the perfect accompaniment to my videos. So it's published by New in Chess, written by Jan Timman, of course, incredibly strong player and fantastic analyst. Available from newinchess.com for $29.95. Timman writes, "In my secondary school years, there were two persons I looked upon more or less as idols. Bob Dylan and Bobby Fischer, in that order." And indeed, there are similarities between Dylan and Fischer, actually. Both have acquired a slightly mythical status, and both had periods where they lived as a somewhat reclusive life. So Timman approaches the subject really as an unashamed fan of Fischer. But Timman also, in his analysis, is very keen to dispel the myth of Fischer's perfect play. He certainly didn't play perfectly, but what Fischer had was an extraordinary will to win. So Timman, who was born in 51, so he was sort of 1920, about in those years, 1970 71, was an eyewitness to Fischer's rise, and indeed was starting his chess career as the events in the book transpired. So, I mean, one question is there anything new in this book? Well, I think there is, because Timman personally knew a lot of the characters that played Fischer at that time. So, for example, he was able to ask Robert Hübner what it was like playing against Fischer. And, there are a lot of personal anecdotes in there, which is great to see for Fischer fanatics like myself. It's great to hear those anecdotes. But I think the highlight of this book are Timman's excellent annotations. You can go through the games without chess set and get the story and understand what was going on in those games. There are 63 annotated games, not just from the candidates matches, but the tournaments that Fischer played at that time as well. And Timman annotates the games with lots of description. So there are, of course, variations, but only at critical moments to illustrate a point. So I think Timman's analysis really, of course, is very objective. And I think that gets us to a clearer view of what was really going on with Fischer in those years. But anyway, and by the way, I warmly recommend the book. I think it's excellent. But let me show you one of those games that Timman annotates in the book. So this is the game between Bobby Fischer playing white and Wolfgang Unsicker playing black, and this was played in the Siegen Olympiad in 1970. So Unsicker was one of West Germany's strongest players in the post-war period. I would say a very classical player. And we see Fischer playing the Spanish. And it's the exchange variation. I mean, generally Fischer liked bishop a4 and was, well, as I've shown on the channel, an incredible exponent of the Spanish. But he did play the exchange variation on occasion. He won with it on 3 occasions in the '66 Olympiad. So this is a few years on, but yeah, it popped up in his games now and again. And I mean, I want to show this game because I think it demonstrates Fischer's style incredibly well, that kind of clear strategic style. And this game was always held up to be, well, like a model game. But actually, as Timman demonstrates, there was more to this game than meets the eye. And in fact, Unsicker was doing fine right until near the end. But that in itself, I think, is quite interesting. Well, in exchanging off on c6, you can see, and then playing d4, you can see that Fischer gets this kingside majority with white. And really, the whole of this game is about exploiting that. And there's such a clarity about Fischer's strategy here. I think that's worth noting. f4. And here is the first moment in the game where Fischer really stamps his style and strategy on the game. He played pawn to f5, and as Timman notes, this has echoes of the Lasker Capablanca game from St. Petersburg 1914, a classic encounter where Lasker, actually from the same opening, played in a similar way, and this pawn serves to cramp that bishop on c8. But, you know, if you're a positional purist, you might say, well, it looks a bit strange to give black use of this square, but, well, as Fischer demonstrates, actually, white can get away with that. Here, Unsicker played queen e7, but bishop d7 actually is an excellent move. And here, black should equalise. The point is that this bishop manages to reach a good square, attacking the e4 pawn, which balances that weak pawn on d6. Anyway, queen e7 was played, and now bishop f4, so it's important to get rid of that bishop. And, well, I think the battle lines are being drawn already. You can see that Fischer is potentially angling for e5. Here, as Timman notes, rook f2 is actually a better move than Fischer's move. Fischer played c3. Actually, rook f2, for various reasons, would have been much better. He could have carried out his manoeuvre knight f3 quicker. Rook e8, g4. So you can see, yeah, that bishop is locked out of play, and Fischer introduces a new idea, which is potentially to break with g5. Queen g3. Queen heading over. And here, instead of rook e7, Timman points out that there are a couple of moves which would have been better. c5 and bishop c6 again, and also g6. But still, black is just about okay here. But knight f3 is a very nice move. So angling for one of these breaks. And here, Fischer plays e5. Somehow a very classical move. Timman actually prefers g5. But e5 played. And you can see that Fischer is starting to realise this wonderful kingside pawn majority. But it's actually still not that clear. But certainly Unsicker would have felt under pressure here. And now Fischer exchanges a pair of rooks and plays the knight into e5. So Fischer has achieved a great deal. h6, h4. So if you're getting g5, then black's king is starting to really feel the squeeze here. But as Timman notes, queen d2 actually sets white a few problems. In this position, this looks absolutely terrifying for black, but actually it's very, well, as Timman says, white isn't able to force anything in this position, but it does look very scary. And he well, he speculates that Unsicker was probably short of time. Fischer used to move very, very quickly, and this is an intimidating position for black to try to defend. And rook e2. So if queen takes pawn, then knight g6 wins material. Queen c4 check. And Fischer has spotted this idea. So he's playing it actually in a very pure way. He is looking just to exchange pieces and get closer to a winning endgame of knight against bishop. And magically, he manages to achieve that. And here, well, this is the final blunder from Unsicker. And this really is a blunder. You could say that moves before are maybe not the most accurate, but this is actually a blunder. Black's best chance here is queen d6. So that if queen e8, then queen g3, of course, well, probably gives a perpetual check. Of course, white has different ways to play knight e5, for example, and then potentially bringing the king up the board to support g5. And black is still under pressure here, but it's not clear. But Unsicker played bishop d7, and that's a losing move, because after this, Fischer is able to force a winning endgame with queen e7. The problem is that white threatens, well, for example, if the queen comes here, then, well, you can even play queen takes bishop, but I don't know which is better. Knight check and knight takes bishop is winning. So Unsicker was forced to exchange queens. And now you can see this wonderful majority is going to win the day. And also black's king is really badly boxed in here as well. So this is quite simple. This is black's only move. Of course, one could take here, but that's a little bit complicated with the bishop hitting the pawn on g4. Instead, Fischer keeps it simple and attacks the pawn, threatens knight f6 check, so just wins a pawn. And it's interesting, we've seen virtually no tactics in this game. And again, that was typical of Fischer. If you look at his games, so often you'll find that tactics only appear at certain sort of little key moments in the game where he uses it to further a strategic end. So here is practically the only tactic in the game. If bishop g4, then knight f6 check. So in that way, Fischer saves his extra pawn. And now again, a little tactic. Instead of moving the knight, king f2 pushes the bishop away. And now knight d7. Again, a nice little tactic. If bishop takes pawn, check. And that forces a knight fork. There we are, knight e5. So in the game, Unsicker played c4 and then king g3, securing that pawn. And here, Unsicker resigned. Well, basically, this knight is going to hop around somewhere and win another pawn. Depends how black plays. For example, bishop here. It's possible to play knight b6 and double attack. But anyway, Unsicker resigned here. He's a clear pawn down, and probably another one is dropping as well. I think that game really illustrates Fischer's style so well. That clear strategic thinking. And it reminds me a lot of games by, well, Karpov, or actually in particular Magnus Carlsen, who often plays these games that have this clear strategic narrative. And you can always point out afterwards where his opponent could have defended better. But it's just so incredibly difficult for the defender to hold these kind of positions, because somehow there's always a way forward or a way you can shift things around to try to make another winning attempt. Anyway, let me come back to this book. The Unstoppable American. I warmly recommend it. There we go. The Unstoppable American by Jan Timman. Bobby Fischer's Road to Reykjavik, covering the years 1970 and 1971 in great detail. Available from newinchess.com, $29.95. And yeah, it's great. I mean, I've got a stack of Fischer books on my bookshelf, but this adds to the collection. So, I mean, key points here: 63 annotated games, excellent analysis that gets us closer to an objective view of Fischer's play, and fine anecdotes that help to paint a picture of Fischer's personality and how his personality relates to his play. I recommend it.